Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to this very exciting webinar on cheating time, saving lives from cardiac arrest or opioid overdose. We are thrilled to have Dr. Ornato with us. You saw his bio in the registration and in the promotion that we've done. Now you see it on the screen. We found out earlier that Dr. Ornato has been the medical director at the Richmond Ambulance Authority since 1986. For many of you on this webinar, that's probably even before you started your career in EMS. So kudos to Dr. Ornato. So again, thank you for joining. I'm going to turn the floor over to Ben, who's going to tell you guys a little bit about the session and how to do questions and answers.
Thanks for joining us for today's AIM High webinar. The webinar is being recorded. The on-demand archive will be posted to the AAA website within 48 hours of the live session and will be included in the next AAA Member Digest e-newsletter. A link to today's slides will be posted in the chat shortly and was included in the reminder email. To ask questions, please use the Q&A function, double dialog bubble button. The chat will be disabled for participants. Dr. Ornato, the floor is yours.
All right, and before he takes over, let me just tell you guys a little bit about AIM High. AIM High is an association of high-performance, high-value EMS systems. And we really focus on improving patient outcomes, but also improving economic efficiency, operational effectiveness, and making sure that we are very transparent with the data that we share. And many of you may have seen some of our recent benchmark studies that are being sent to the industry. The first quarter and second quarter for 2024 is already out. The next 2 quarters will be coming out here in the next 30 days. So keep an eye on that to see how you compare. Here's a list of our current members. If you are interested in joining this organization, please feel free to visit our website at aimhigh.mobi, and you'll see information about membership qualifications and how to apply for membership in the Academy of International Mobile Healthcare Integration. With that, now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Ornato to share with us his wisdom.
Hey, thanks, Matt and Ben. Appreciate the help from both of you. And let's see, I've got sharing up and running. Okay, so my theme for this presentation is that high-performance EMS systems can only do so much in terms of, in the future, improving survival from time-dependent problems like cardiac arrest, naloxone overdose, et cetera, and that it really is almost impossible in terms of cost, if not logistics, for us to dramatically improve survival in conditions such as I just mentioned. So the potential use of drones to augment what our controllers, telecommunicators can get lay bystanders at the scene of an emergency that's life or death. The potential is really what I think is an opportunity for all of us. So with that, I'm going to really focus on cardiac arrest and naloxone overdose as 2 sort of prototype examples in which potential use of drone delivery of devices and drugs can be beneficial. The chain of survival, of course, everyone is well aware, is the mantra that guides American Red Cross teaching for decades now. But we've hit a ceiling that appears to be virtually impenetrable, and I'll show you data on that in a minute. So I'm going to really walk you through the potential opportunities for the use of drone technology and give you some specific examples, including the various projects that are underway currently, including one I'm privileged to be involved in with a dear colleague, friend at Duke University that I'll tell you about in a little bit. First, to set the stage, most folks have rarely seen a person go into cardiac arrest, including most of us in EMS. And I'm not including the patients that we see in the ED or an ICU. This is an event typical of what happens.
Loyola just started running the system. So Terrell throws Hank the alley hooper from half court. He catches it and thunder, dunk down, boom.
From the classic, Hank Gathers slam dunk and running back down the court. It's not like we saw signs that he wasn't feeling so well. It just happened split second.
And the gym just got silent. I mean, you can hear a pin drop.
Sadly, this was in 1990. AEDs were not available to the public quite yet. In fact, that didn't happen for about 11 or 12 more years. And even the staff did not have the ability to defibrillate. Again, that is a much more recent occurrence, as we all know. And all of you are familiar with the fact that we lose about 300,000 Americans per year from out of hospital cardiac arrest, and we lose roughly another 100 some odd thousand from naloxone, from opioid overdoses. And the thing that both of them, of course, have in common is that they're very amenable to treatment if you can treat them very, very promptly. I'm going to share with you some statistics and information shortly showing that we don't do that very often in typical EMS configurations. So let me start with the example of cardiac arrest due to ventricular fibrillation. When a cardiac arrest occurs in a public location and it's witnessed, such as we had in the Resuscitation Outcomes Consortium, the 12-year NIH multi-center trial network that I had the privilege of chairing the steering committee on for all the cardiac arrest studies, are units in 10 different geographic locations, 8 US and 2 Canadian. Our units involved over 250 EMS agencies, and we ran over 20,000 cardiac arrests per year. And you'll see very shortly that they're some of the best well-organized, efficient EMS agencies, at least in North America. And we weren't able to do much better than I'm going to share with you very shortly. So let's look at what actually happens when the heart fibrillates in an EP lab. Now, in the early years of implanting implantable defibrillators, it was standard to put the defibrillator device in the victim on the operating table under anesthesia, and towards the end of the procedure to actually induce ventricular fibrillation to guarantee that the device would recognize it and that it would ablate it and restart the heart very promptly. And in fact, the likelihood that it's going to restart if you shock it within 20, 30 seconds is 10,000 with almost no chance of 1 in 10,000 that actually is not going to respond to the first shock. So let's see what this looks like.
Stimulate or put her into ventricular fibrillation, which is cardiac arrest, but obviously in a controlled situation.
Pacing now, fibrillation, VF, charging to 15, delivered, reverted.
But what happens in the real world of EMS, even with high performance agencies like most of the folks on this call are running, is that we don't have anywhere near that kind of outcome. So if we look at what data exists in the North American literature, Terry Valenzuela back in 2000, as many of you know, looked at the survival in Las Vegas casinos, where on the gaming floor, There are videos that show when a person goes down and when EMS is able to provide defibrillation. And it was running around 8 minutes from the call to 911 after the person collapsed. He then got permission from the FDA because back in 2000, laypersons were not allowed to have access to AEDs, but he was able to get permission for the security guards to be trained. And when they were able to defibrillate in 3 minutes, again, proven by video camera surveillance, 3/4 of the victims survived. When the first shock occurred at 5 minutes, it dropped down to 53%. You can see that this really nicely is a almost straight downward trajectory, showing that every minute delay until the first shock, there's a 10% decrease in survival. Pretty much as Rich Cummins, myself, Paul Pepe, and Bill Thies said way back in the early 90s. Rich, at the time from University of Washington, chaired ECC committee. I was vice chair, and Paul was one of our ACLS committee members. And so what's the difference between a shock in the operating theater or in the EP lab and what we see in EMS? And the answer is the ATP levels drop dramatically minute after cardiac arrest when CPR is not being done. So that by minute 10, you're down to like less than 40%. And here's what it looks like in an animal model. This is a pig under anesthesia in an operating room. Pig heart in ventricular fibrillation. This is right ventricle, no CPR being done. Venous return continues passively and the RV overfills. The atria are going to continue to twitch. This is left ventricle down here. Now notice 5 minutes in, cyanotic, the VF is very fine. You can hardly see it. When a shock is given, nothing happens. ATP is depleted. Now with just a little bit of vigorous open chest massage, atria are still beating, but the ventricles are silent. One shock and it starts right up. So really that's the problem. That's the physical problem that we're dealing with. Ventricular fibrillation eats up ATP very, very rapidly and very avidly. So the problem is by the time our EMS crews get there, and this is the ROC consortium, figures running over 20,000 cardiac arrests per year, is a lot of arrests that were involved in the randomized trial that we did over that period of time. The percent of cases that were in VF that were witnessed that were shockable rhythm when the EMS units first got there was about 20%. And you see after COVID, we're still rebounding, trying to come out from that, quote, almost all-time high. And we're running about 16, 18% currently in the CARES registry nationally. So what does this mean in terms of when that first shock was given? Well, in North Carolina, these are 599 witnessed cardiac arrests out of hospital cases. And the initial rhythm was shockable in 20% when the time from 911 call receipt until the defibrillator was attached and a shock was advised, 14 minutes. Now, this is a combination of urban, suburban, and rural sites. So, you have to understand that this is probably an outside number. But when you look at the so-called response time interval that traditionally all of us report, table 1 or table 2 of papers that are representing our findings in randomized cardiac arrest trials, we're talking about the response time interval, which we as EMS medical directors know is the response time interval to the curb, or when the curb is in sight. Okay. So biologically, we estimate that the first shock is not occurring in 6 or 7 or 8 minutes after 911 call. But in the ROC consortium, we were estimating that it was occurring at about 11 minutes. And if you look at the sites that are involved in the ROC consortium cardiac arrest trials, they're some of the best in North America. You know, they're sort of the envy of most cities and EMS services. So my bottom line is the reality is we're actually beginning treatment a lot later after out-of-hospital cardiac arrest onset, and translate that to opioid overdose as well. And I think that's really the reality of why we don't save as many lives as we might hope. And I mentioned that a number of us that have been involved in AHA guideline process for quite some time really have been very proud of the progress that we've made in most communities throughout the US and Canada and throughout the world with this simple concept of a chain of survival. And yeah, we've made it a little bit more complex more recently, but by and large, it's still you know, the mantra for how we train lay people, how we train healthcare professionals, and basically the public education that our crews are doing often is sort of centered on that for cardiac arrest. It wasn't until the early 2000s that the public at large had access to AEDs, even though the first AEDs came on the market in 1980. And it was a device called a heart aid AED. It was an interesting device that used a very unusual pathway to defibrillate. You had a C2 airway that would go in the back of the tongue, and a electrode, gel electrode would go on the front of the chest. You can see that that wasn't really popular, but nonetheless it worked. Soon thereafter, by the mid-80s, several of the major manufacturers, of course, had AEDs on the market, very similar to what we use today. But the sale and the adoption by EMS agencies really was more sluggish than everyone had hoped. And so in the early 90s, American Heart Association put together a task force called the Future of CPR, headed by Mike Weisfeld, who then was chair of cardiology at Johns Hopkins, one of the true pioneers in the whole field of resuscitation. And their conclusion that they reported to American Heart was the future of CPR is public access AED use. The FDA wouldn't allow the use of these devices. So in 1994, the American Heart Association hosted in Washington, D.C., a public access defibrillation conference. And we actually, by then, had Qantas Airlines put AEDs on a handful of their aircraft who were flying the Pacific routes. And within the first month, they had their first survivor who was defibrillated by a flight attendant halfway across the Pacific. He was awake by the time they landed, and turned out to have normal neurologic function. And by virtue of the friendship that a few of us had with the physician director of Qantas, we were able to get a hold of the survivor. And he agreed to have American Heart pay his way to fly him to the PAD conference at the Washington Hilton. And we got incredible press coverage. And we thought that was going to put us over the top in terms of getting the FDA to allow lay people to use devices. Well, that didn't quite happen. 2 years later, Mike Weisfeld and I were knocking on the door of National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute, NIH, and they were still really reluctant to release the funding necessary to do a large trial, even though it was clear from what the FDA was telling us that they weren't going to let lay people use AEDs unless a large clinical trial could be done. Meanwhile, American Heart got Congress and the president to pass and sign the Cardiac Arrest Survival Act, which basically championed the proliferation and use of AEDs by healthcare providers as well as laypersons. But we were able to finally get help from the then president, who was able to convince NIH to invest in the project that we were hoping to do to get FDA approval. And in fact, we got together 23 US, a couple of Canadian cities, Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, and American Heart and Red Cross trained over 19,000 lay people in 23 cities. Industry donated 1,500 AEDs, and in the end were so generous to allow the sites to keep them. And we trained these rescuers to recognize cardiac arrest. These were lay people that lived in places that had within their immediate 2-minute environment a large number of people. These were like high-rise buildings or senior centers, with homes, et cetera. And we trained all of the lay rescuers to call 911 after they recognize the cardiac arrest, start CPR, fetch an AED, and use it. But we only had enough AEDs to put in half of the sites. So every 3 months, we rotated which sites had the AEDs. And the bottom line was at the end of 18 months, we doubled survival in the sites that had access to the AEDs. And based on this, a short while later, we got the FDA to flip the switch and allow laypersons to have access to AEDs. Now, a lot, of course, has happened since then in the world of cardiac arrest out of hospital management. We have wonderful technologies like, example, of course, we're all familiar with pulse point. But the limitation in North America has been really interesting to watch. This was actually the first paper. Steve Brooks, he was one of our investigators in various trials that I mentioned from the Toronto area. And at least in the early days of pulse point, we really weren't having a very large numbers of laypersons actually respond, and even smaller numbers actually fetching an AED. This is in contrast to what has been seen in Europe, particularly in the northern countries, where there's been a similar system. It isn't pulse point, but it's similar idea, similar technology, activates lay volunteers. And their percentage of respondents has been not, we're not talking 80, 90%. We're talking under 10%, but still much higher. And the difference is that if you look culturally and historically, several of the countries that have had better luck with this concept have a traditional duty for laypersons to respond. And in some of the countries, for example, if you're on the equivalent of a U.S. Major highway interstate, and an accident occurs in front of you that looks like it has injured individuals, you're actually required to stop by law. And if someone turns in your license plate, you can get a ticket for it. So, there's some interesting cultural differences that may be playing a role. Now, I guess about 8 or 9 years ago, I started to change my personal impression about whether drones were going to be a good thing for us in civilized places, highly populated places like most of us, well, all of us live in North America. And the reason for that is I'm a pilot. I've been a pilot for 20 some odd years. I fly a little prop jet. And, in the 8 to 10 year ago period when drones started to become really fun, wonderful things to have and to play with, there was a increasing concern that violators allowing their drones to be flown in vicinities of airports and breaking above the 400-foot above ground level legal limit for them to be flown, or at least civilian drones. My concern, like most pilots, was, oh my God, it's just a matter of time before, some terrible tragedy is going to happen with an aircraft being, colliding with a drone and potentially taking the aircraft out. But I started to really change my thinking when I realized the potential for drones to deliver things like AEDs, naloxone, et cetera. Of course, I was not the only one having that revelation, and I'm just sort of mentioning what I think has become obvious to an increasing number of individuals, particularly those of us involved in EMS. Other countries are a bit ahead of us, not so much for AED delivery, but I'll put in some kudos and show you a quick video of our colleagues in Sweden, who actually have 5 drone bases operative. And Rwanda as a good example of delivering medical supplies by really fast, powerful drones over jungle. So the obvious potential uses or early uses of drone delivery of medical devices are listed here. AEDs, naloxone, EpiPens for anaphylaxis, stop the bleed kits, et cetera. And around 2015, 2016-ish, I started to realize the potential for those of us in EMS. Back then, however, the FDA did not have a pathway that would allow delivery of medical drugs or devices. And yet, it seemed inevitable that that was likely going to happen because already by then, EMS agencies, certainly law enforcement, fire agencies were using drones for surveillance and for such things as tactical operations for law enforcement. And so I got interested enough that I decided maybe we could put a little team together at the university that I work at, Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, and apply for a grant to explore this idea. I have a secondary appointment in the College of Engineering. For 15, 20 years, every year I supervise projects that our students, engineering students, execute. And I put a team together composed of some of our engineering students and 2 professors at VCU in engineering, a small business called Virginia UAS, which is the largest Part 107 FAA-approved commercial drone training operator in the greater Richmond area. It turns out that the guy that runs it is a guy named Scott Strimple, or I should say Captain Scott Strimple, because his day job is he's a Boeing 777 United Airlines captain. And for about 2 weeks of every month, he's flying passengers all over. His routes are Europe and Asia. And that this is his aircraft at the top. And sadly, this is mine, a little 6-seater prop jet that is great, but colored me envious. Well, the other really neat thing about Scott is that he has another small business for about 15, 20 years in Hollywood that does drone cinematography. And he's actually won 2 real Hollywood Emmy Awards for the cinematography that he and his teams have done. So with this kind of a team, as well as, thank you, my dear friends and colleagues at Richmond Ambulance, we were able to get a grant from the National Institutes of Health, from NIDA, which is National Institute of Drug Abuse. because initially my thought was, well, if the FAA is going to let us do anything, it's going to be to deliver naloxone, not an AED. Why? AED, the lightest one that would be suitable, weighs 3.5 pounds. Naloxone weighs 4 ounces, about half the weight of a little pack of gum. And so, the big issue with the FAA, of course, is safety. That's their primary mission. And so if a drone goes out of control and comes crashing down to the ground, or whatever you're trying to deliver is jettisoned and comes crashing down to the ground, wouldn't you rather it be 4 ounces than 3.5 pounds? That was our reasoning. So we got a grant. It was about $300,000. And we put together a team and trained 7 of our comm center operators, telecommunicators, as FAA-certified Part 107 commercial drone pilots. This was our team from engineering, really great kids. And we put together a side little project that some of my medical students and residents helped us with. And what we did was we set up a simulation for 30 of our recovering opioid addicts who were in our recovery program, that they were detoxed and they were undergoing weekly sessions with their counselors. And what we did was we had them, with an IRB-approved protocol, agree to a 10-minute simulation in which they would play the role of a rescuer. And we gave them a $25 Walmart gift certificate, which the IRB allowed for that 10-minute participation. And we basically consented them in one room. And after explaining the project, and they said, okay, we would open the door to the next room. And in the next room was a resuscitation type mannequin on the table. And we said, this is your best friend. Your friend has just taken an overdose and has collapsed and is not breathing. Handed them a walkie-talkie simulating 911, and with protocol that our telecommunicators put together, they were given pre-arrival instructions to run out the front door of the building, and on the ground was going to be a drone that had naloxone on the top of it. They were told to stay on the line. They grabbed the naloxone, brought it in, and they were talked through administering it into the nostril of the mannequin. The bottom line was all of them were able to complete the simulation in the median time from handing them the phone until they actually administered the naloxone was 2 minutes and 2 seconds. So we were pretty well convinced that the concept of having telecommunicators simply direct in a simulation a population similar to those individuals, at least who have opioid overdoses, we sort of felt that that was giving us enough reason to believe we were kind of on a reasonable track. Around this time, this YouTube video came out that most of you have seen.
112 operator, what is your emergency?
It's my dad. I think he had a heart attack. Please help, he's not breathing anymore.
Please stay calm. What's your name?
Joanna.
Good, Joanna. We've got your location. The ambulance drone is on its way. Remove his top shirt to uncover his torso.
Okay.
Great. Can you go to the nearest exit? The ambulance drone is almost there.
Okay. I'm outside.
I'll be talking through the drone now, so you can put down the phone.
Now please pick up the drone and bring it to your father.
You're doing great.
Okay, pull the green lid. Now place the pads on your father's chest. Good, I can see that the pads are properly applied. Joanna, please stay clear of your father. We'll take it from here.
Now that was obviously a simulation, but Andreas Clausen, who is really kind of the lead team member in the Stockholm group, now has 5 bases surrounding Stockholm, and published this little case report in New England Journal of Medicine in 2022, almost identical to what the simulation shows. A 71-year-old male shoveling snow collapsed. His wife called EMS, started pumping on his chest with the telecommunicator directions. The drone arrived in 3 minutes, 19 seconds. The gentleman was defibrillated by the drone AED, 5 minutes, 30 seconds, awakened en route to the hospital, fully recovered. ICD was inserted, and he was home back to normal at day 7. We ended our initial NIH-sponsored project and began discussions with NIH about funding an actual implementation project to have drones deliver at least naloxone with an intent potentially to add AEDs. The problem was in 2017, 18, 19, NIH was extremely interested in the project, but the FAA regs really were not mature enough and existent that would allow drones to deliver medical devices only to be used at least by public safety for surveillance and tactical type purposes. Well, fortunately, things have begun to change, and about 1.5 years ago, after a 3-year period of rulemaking, the FAA has come forward with what is known as the Drone as First Responder DFR program, and lots of very important issues that are addressed in the document that the FAA has produced that give very clear guidance as to how EMS, public safety, police, fire agencies might be able to apply for permission to be able to provide this kind of service. Now, I say police, fire, and EMS, understanding that when you look at the regulations, they really focus on law enforcement taking the lead. You might say, well, why? Well, a couple of reasons. One is because they do a lot more calls typically than EMS or fire. Secondly, for surveillance use, several sites, and I'll show you some examples shortly, have already a lot of experience using drones not to deliver things, but rather for surveillance. And because of that experience and because of the large number of calls, and again, you'll see some examples shortly, it becomes much more cost effective to have pilots available for many hours during the day, or ideally 24/7. Now, the new DFR program details are kind of summarized here. And I'm not going to go over all of them. We don't have time, but I encourage you to go on the FAA website. If you're interested in learning the details, you can download the applicable documents that give guidance on, how one could potentially explore setting up such a program. They're very detailed, and you have a lot of things that you have to account for and articulate, and a lot has to be done in training and QI, et cetera, et cetera. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not you fill out a form and a couple of hours later you submit it, and then a week later you get approval. No, we're very early into the process of this DFR type program. And it really is a learning curve, both for those of us that are on the curve, as well as certainly the FAA on the other end. Having said all of that, I can give nothing but the highest marks to the FAA for the help and understanding and support they're providing to public safety agencies to really move forward with this concept. It's very clear that at least the wonderful people that we've had the privilege of interacting with really understand the public health importance to our citizens. And they really are, I think, a real good partner. So I really want to make that point as firmly as I can. They're really good people, and they're really trying to help us navigate the waters so that we can figure out a way to do this safely and effectively. A lot of things that are obvious, you have to integrate with your telecommunicator protocols. Lots of technology exists currently, but there are some limitations that within the next couple of years are probably going to go away. But a fair amount of technology is available to be able to implement such programs. Drone bases have to be identified. You have to be able to figure out how you're going to evade other traffic, like helicopters in particular, as well as fixed objects. I've already mentioned protocols that have to be executed, just like any other pre-arrival protocols that any of us develop. Public awareness and public outreach, and before any of us implement a program, we've got to reach out to the public and make sure they're aware, involved, and dissipate any concerns they might have. One of the first agencies, really the premier agency that I'm going to show you a video on, is called Chula Vista on the West Coast in California. They have really the first DFR program in the country that's been up and running. It's run by law enforcement. And I'm going to show you a quick video from there indicating how they've been using it for essentially primarily law enforcement use, understanding that up until the DFR regs have come out, they weren't allowed to do things like deliver defibrillators and naloxone. But again, that's beginning to change.
When you look at our department right now and you look at what we've done with technology, it is groundbreaking. Prior to Live 911, we would have officers that would receive a radio call from dispatch, and they'd provide them with the information, and they do an amazing job. But what happens is sometimes you don't get all the information. My officers have the ability now to hear a live feed of the actual 911 call, and then they can hear the details that sometimes might be left out. What this means to the community is if an officer has the ability to get there quicker, and your family member or you are in a situation where it's potentially life or death, will 30 seconds make a difference to you?
When you get that call, the dispatcher's entering as fast as she can with a keyboard. I'm actually hearing what's going on. So it takes a few minutes for them to get it to me, and I already know what I'm looking at as I'm driving to the call. So here comes the 911 call. So it's right up here.
They can look on Live 911 and see exactly where that caller is standing and drive. We're the first agency in the country to have drone as a first responders. We can fly our drones up to 3 nautical miles for any call for service.
We average between 16 to 18 calls for service a day. And I'm usually on scene within 120 seconds.
Not only would officers get the audio of the call, get the location of where it was happening, they'd actually also get a simultaneous video feed of what was going on at the scene.
And I'm providing real-time information. So what's good about this position is sometimes I'm on scene and the call hasn't even been entered yet because they're still talking and they're still typing and they've got a lot of information to put in. On top of that, the dispatchers like it. So the dispatchers that are taking the call are now looking at my live feed and directing questions to the people that call. Hey, I'm watching the live drone footage. Is that black car involved? So I've located the house and I heard somebody else screaming in the background. I knew something wasn't right. So that lady just jumped out the window. That sure looks like a large knife. I have the radio right here. I have my headset on. I click my foot pedal and say, we've got a knife involved in a dispute here. We need to get people here. I was thinking bad things are about to happen here. Thankfully, she throws the knife and the officers arrive and they handle things.
Even though it's just a couple of minutes is a huge difference in a life or death emergency.
It's a game changer.
This is an opportunity to help officers have more information, to make better informed decisions, to get there quicker, and to save people's lives. When you look at
So the projects I'm going to tell you about that we're doing in a moment is going to be using Live 911 so that our law enforcement, first responders, fire first responders, and EMS are able to actually see live feeds from the drone that's going to be delivering AEDs and or naloxone. The entire system is really built on the backbone of the existing police, fire, and EMS response to life or death emergencies. Drone bases have to be identified, as I mentioned, so that they can service the highest number of calls based on actual experience. As I've already mentioned, Live 911 is a piece of the puzzle. Call volume is integral to making this concept cost effective. And as you saw in the Chula Vista video, they're running 18, 20 or more just surveillance calls a day. And that really, on top of fire and EMS utilization, is what's going to make this concept more cost effective. In addition, for more rural areas or suburban areas, I think where this concept is going to go is similar to what we have in air traffic control, which is regional centers. When I take off out of Richmond International, I'm up in the air in about 2 or 3 minutes at a couple of thousand feet on my way to 25,000 feet. And I'm handed off to a regional center that covers a couple of state regions. It would not make sense to have every 2 minutes or 5 minutes another individual 24/7 controlling my aircraft. And so this whole concept of having centers that pilot remotely is very akin to what our military does, flying drones halfway around the world. The technology exists, and really that's what's going to make this more cost effective. There are weather limitations. If you're interested, again, go on the website for FAA and you'll see all of the details. But we have available in the world of drones. By the way, I'm a commercial drone pilot as well. We have available off the shelf about $20,000 wonderful units that are temperature controlled that'll handle the large drones that we would typically use for EMS application. The biggest issue right now with the FAA is flight beyond visual line of sight. And what that means, that BVLOS is the terminology, is the biggest concern, again, is helicopter traffic. And right now, we have a requirement in the FAA world to have a physical person, not a camera, but a person at the site of the drone as it's being launched, to look 360 degrees before you can push the button and get it up in the air, to make sure there's not a helicopter within sight. Well, that is a real limitation. We have in all of our aircraft as of 2020, even the little Cessnas, an FAA requirement for ADS-B radio, which basically broadcasts and shows where other traffic, other aircraft are around you. But it has some limitations in terms of how high you have to be off the ground before you can actually have it seen by the system and broadcast to other aircraft. There is radar that can point really closer to the ground. We're actually putting 2 of them in one of the sites that we're putting in a DFR AED delivery program in North Carolina currently. For 2 of the systems is $8 million. So yes, it's a solution, but it's not really going to solve the problem. Finally, a lot of work is being done by NASA. It's actually being done at in Hampton Roads area, not far from Richmond, and we are working collaboratively with the folks that run that site. They're doing some really interesting testing on new technology that hopefully in the next couple of years might be commercially available to go on drones that actually will visually be scanning the sky in front of them. And if they detect any other aircraft, have onboard artificial intelligence that will steer that drone and essentially avoid that traffic by either standing still, going down, going to the right, left, etc., or all the above. Basically taking away the need to have direct communication with that other aircraft. Finally, in terms of the concept, if you look at the economics of the world of implementing drones for delivery of medical devices, we're still early enough that there are public-private partnerships and grants that are available in many locations, states, both local, state, and federal. And the comparative analysis of enhancing EMS service is really favorable to this whole concept. For example, this is a heat map of the opioid overdoses in the 62.5 square mile of downtown Richmond. This is where the opioid overdoses occur. This is where the cardiac arrests occur. We would only need 6 commercial drones of the type that we're intending to fly in a project that I'm going to tell you about shortly. Only need 6 of them, 6 bases, because they fly at 60 to 70 miles an hour. We can get them up in the air in 18 to 20 seconds from 911 call receipt. When you do the arithmetic, if you wanted to have enough AEDs throughout the city of Richmond, you'd have to put an AED probably on every other telephone pole so that a person could run outside, fetch it, and come back within 2 minutes. That would cost a lot of money. You'd have to have almost 8,000 AEDs. And why not put naloxone there as well? Sure. But how long are they going to last? I mean, are they going to survive the weather? No. Are they going to survive theft? No. You see where I'm going? That's $16 million. Instead, you could put 6 drone bases in at a cost that's a fraction of what it would be for the telephone pole solution. That's 50 times less expensive than a pre-positioned AED strategy. So anyway, a colleague of mine, dear friend, also a cardiologist like myself, on board at EMIM and CARDS, she's CARDS and internal medicine. She and I are the only 2 people, to the best of our knowledge, that NIH has been funding for the last several years to explore this concept, to try to put some real meat on the bones and data on, whether this is going to be cost effective and how do you get through the FAA regs, et cetera. We were privileged to be part of a grant that was awarded to the University of Washington with 5 sub-grants under it. We're one of them. It's $20 million 4-year grant. Our portion is $4 million, split between our 2 sites, Duke and VCU. And Monique and I are the co-PIs. And the concept is to set up a drone delivery of AEDs in 2 sites, James City County, which is Williamsburg area, and Forsyth County. Now you might say, well, why not, Durham, and why not Richmond? Well, it turns out the grant we applied for, AHA, was very specific. They were looking for projects that improve cardiovascular health, really in rural/suburban areas, not urban areas. And so we were able to apply for the project. It got a lot of excitement. Thank you, AHA, in terms of their recognizing the Grant Review Committee, the potential. And so we're funded. We're now a year into it, and we're about 6 months from Forsyth being able to fly their first AEDs, because they already had a drone program run by police, just like James City County. They already had 7 or 8 trained Part 107 drone pilots, just like James City County. But they were a bit ahead in terms of climbing the ladder for the FAA regulations. And Forsyth is awesome site. And here's a press conference that Monique ran with her team just last month. Oh, I gotta get it to run. Here we go.
Forsyth County Sheriff's Office showed off its new AED drone today.
It delivers life-saving devices before first responders can get to emergency situations. WFMY News 2's Hunter Funk shows us how it works.
Sudden cardiac arrest can be fatal, with every minute counting for your survival. These 4 wheels can only get you there so fast, but a new Forsyth County AED drone program can get to you in roughly half the time, no matter where you might be.
Forsyth County 911.
This is a simulation.
Hi, there's someone unconscious. I need help. Where you at, ma'am? I'm in a parking lot. I'm at a church off of Louisville Clemens Road.
There's going to be an AED drone that is going to be arriving to you. We estimate that a drone can arrive on the scene of a person in cardiac arrest somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes, even before a first responder could. And that's what the incredible benefit of this, especially in our rural counties.
It's taking a large partnership to make this happen. Duke University received more than $4 million from the American Heart Association, which is turning its 6-year research into reality.
I had chills just seeing this in action. Even though it's a simulation, seeing it in action for the first time and knowing that over the next few months that this is going to become an integrated part of emergency medical care.
The Forsyth County Sheriff hopes it'll propel even more opportunities to save lives.
So many things that we can deliver with this. We can deliver medicine. And thinking about it, imagine having them in locations throughout your county. So someone calls in 911 emergency. The same way we launch a drone for first responders, we can launch an AED remotely.
A bystander will need to use the AED. The county plans to help teach people how to use it, and the program is expected to be launched by the fall. In Forsyth County, Hunter Funk, WFMY News 2.
Okay, so we're at the end, and I have hopefully given you lots of insight about this exciting concept. It is doable, but again, I want to emphasize the critical importance of getting all of the public safety agencies on board, because that's really going to be the easiest model for the FAA to approve. And basically, going through the various steps that are very well elucidated in the roughly 300-page document that the FAA provides. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And if there are any questions, I know we're about at the end of the hour, but happy to try to answer any questions if we have any time for it.
Ben, it looks like Peter may have a question that you want to relay to Dr. Ornato.
Yep. Make sure you notify your insurance company if you are implementing a drone program, as many companies have an exclusion clause for unmanned aircraft.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't mention, but you reminded me. Really, you have to, in addition, of course, to that, because there is a liability concern. There are ways to mitigate it. For example, our model, we're not going to be landing the drone. Instead, the technology exists for us to set it in a high hover, 125 feet above ground level. And with a tether, as you saw in the video, within a couple of seconds, lower it to within about 18 inches of the ground, then remotely release it so it soft lands on the ground. In addition to that, we have the devices that we're going to use have a rocket-powered parachute. So, with a high hover at 125 feet, that's more than enough time if it starts to spin out of control, even though it's got, anywhere from 4 to 6 rotors, which will keep it airborne, basically, if you lose one. But even if it goes out of control, the pilot in command will immediately see that, push a button, and will deploy the parachute.
And Dr. Ornato, I had 2 questions. What kind of training is required for the pilots, and how does that training occur?
Lots of different ways to get the training. The simplest way is in most communities to look up on the internet, drone pilot training part 107 is the buzzword for the course that's FAA approved. However, in the DFR regulations, once you have your core number of pilots and you're operational, not delivering yet, because the FAA isn't going to let you do that. You've got to do a fair number of real calls for surveillance. But once the FAA is convinced that your pilots have enough experience to then begin to graduate to do some simulations, et cetera, you can essentially be allowed in the DFR program to have your lead pilot instructor actually teach the courses and get FAA certification without the expense of having to then keep going external to other agencies. To my knowledge, that's the only exception that the FAA has made, other than having to go to an external course to get approval.
Wow, and that does demonstrate that support that you mentioned earlier from the FAA. Last question. We heard on the video, one of the videos, that the range of the drones is about 3 nautical miles. For those that might be thinking about doing this in a city or in a rural area, if that 3 nautical miles is pretty standard, what is the cost of these kind of drones? How many would you need for a large area?
Firstly, the limitation, the 3 nautical miles, is actually what the FAA is going to allow initially. There are like 5 different levels that you can escalate to as a DFR type program. And initially, they're probably going to let you fly just 2 nautical miles circle. It's not the limitation of the batteries. The batteries for the kind of drones that we and others would likely be flying for this mission, they're about $30,000 each. There are harsh limitations politically right now. Most public safety agencies use Chinese DJI drones, which are awesome drones. But some of you may know there's been a lot of controversy with Congress not wanting anybody to use the Chinese drones for public safety. Lots of concerns, some perhaps more valid than others. But the bottom line is, it looked as though about 2 months ago, there was going to be an exclusion for the use of Chinese drones, DJI in particular, for public safety agencies because of lobbying by public safety organizations, because that's what's mainly being used. They're great drones. The catch is the pendulum swung the other way politically, and it's not at all clear right now whether they're going to be allowed to be used. So anyway, they cost about $30,000. You need to add about $20,000 if you want to put them in a housing, as opposed to having to launch them physically, having a person go out and launch them each time. And their range with the battery is going to be round trip about 40 to 45 minutes. So that's the limiter. Once you get additional experience and FAA is convinced of the safety, you can apply for additional what are called waivers, beyond visual line of sight, tactical waivers, et cetera. Those are the kind of waivers that we either have at Forsyth or Williamsburg or in the process of getting, to be able to eventually cover much more territory with this kind of service. So more of a detail than you probably needed, but I'm hopefully giving you a flavor for where the regs are currently.
Sure. And go ahead, Ben, on Jose's question.
Yep. How does this work for people living in high-rise apartment buildings?
Doesn't. High-rise are really best covered with pre-deployment of an AED. The usual place, as you all probably know, is from the pad drill that we did we found that putting them next to the elevator on the ground floor in the lobby tends to be a logical location to train rescuers, but that's an issue. And I might say that real dense urban use, forget it for the immediate future. I mean, we're really talking in terms of FAA approval. We're really talking about initially probably being suburb to some degree rural. Rural, by the way, has a different pathway for approval. Some of you that are knowledgeable in this area, the airlines fly under what's called Part 135, and the private jets fly on Part 121, the jets for hire. And Part 135 in particular becomes a pathway for the delivery of packages. For example, UPS, Amazon, FedEx, etc., are using that route. It's extremely expensive to get authorization at this stage. But nonetheless, there are a number of projects that are up and running. We have one that I'm very personally proud of, which is in Virginia. Drone Up is a private company, and they partner with Riverside Health System in the Hampton Roads, Newport News area. And they're flying pharmaceuticals across the Chesapeake Bay, 25 nautical mile round trip under Part 135 approval with much more powerful drones that can make that kind of distance. And they're delivering pharmaceuticals to a little island that does mainly oyster fishing. It's called Tangier Island. And they used to have a physician on the shore of Virginia that had a private pilot license and a Cessna. He'd fly over there once a month, land on their little 3,000-foot strip and run a clinic. But he retired a couple of years ago, so they have no physician, they have no pharmacy, no way of getting supplies. So this Part 135 operation, which got approval several months ago, is now meeting that need very cost effectively. So there's some really neat things that are going to be possible with this concept. And I want to emphasize again, we're still very, very early in the game, but what's really neat about it is that we've got a federal agency that gets the importance, appreciates what all of us in public safety do, and they're doing an awesome job of making this a possibility.
Thanks, Dr. Ornato. And I do love DJI. I've got a personal drone, and it's DJI and works off the iPhone. Phenomenally simple, and my granddaughter loves it. She flies it better than I do, so that's fine. She's 7.
Good for her. Good for her.
All right, Ben, you want to bring us home?
I do. Thank you, Dr. Ornato, for an engaging and informative session. The slides for today's session were included in the reminder email you received 1 hour in advance of the Zoom. The slides in the session recording will be posted to the AAA website within 48 hours and will also be emailed out in the next AAA member digest. We hope to see you on another Aim High webinar soon. Thank you and have a great day.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Ornato. Fly safe.
You're welcome.